Senate lawmakers in Washington are debating police reform measures. Derek Chauvin's conviction for the murder of George Floyd and several other incidents where officers have shot and killed black people have put a spotlight on policing here in the United States. A recent Washington Post piece takes a look at this issue and the changes lawmakers from both sides of the aisle want to see. For more on this, I want to bring in Marianna Sotomayor. She's a congressional reporter for the Washington Post. Marianna, good to see you this morning. So break down the Democrats' version of the police reform bill. What's in it, and how does it differ from what the Republicans want to see?
Hi, guys. Good morning, and thanks for having me. Absolutely. So really, the devil is in the details on both of these pieces of legislation. There is a lot of space for compromise, and that is exactly what some senators and also a congresswoman are trying to hash out before they even present a plan to Congress to be negotiated and debated even further. In that Democratic bill, it's obviously named after George Floyd. It's the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. They would ban chokeholds federally across the country. They would also try and ban most no-knock warrants. That is, of course, something that came up after Breonna Taylor died at the hands of police. And also, one of the sticking points between the Republican and Democratic bills is this discussion around qualified immunity. Currently, you cannot sue a police officer directly and claim that they potentially mishandled a situation, especially when it comes to any kind of violence. Democrats are really trying to change that as they really are pushing for accountability on police officers. Republicans also are saying that qualified immunity should be reformed, but they're saying we can't put the blame directly on the police officers. What they're offering up instead, in hopes of a compromise, is to sue police departments. They say that doing that would take off the pressure off the officers, and they say that it could potentially disincentivize potential officers from actually joining the forces. It can make some quit. And they say that police departments, it's their job to reprimand their own officers. Democrats, however, say there's some that have already been saying this is a red line. If we can't sue police officers, then we won't vote for this bill. Congresswoman Karen Bass, who authored that George Floyd bill, is really trying to massage differences here and has kept this conversation open on qualified immunity, essentially saying, well, if Republicans want us to sue police departments, maybe they can come to the table a little bit more and tell us how else and make more proposals on how to make sure we can hold that specific police officer accountable.
So, listen, President Biden's got a big speech coming up in front of a joint session of Congress on the eve of his 100th day in office. Do we expect him to say something about this?
Yes, we do. And, you know, going back to the campaign trail, Biden always said there were three major crises in America that he wanted to tackle. The first one would be the pandemic, the second one, the economy, and the third part of that was social and cultural issues, those divisions that we have been seeing play out over the last year. We do expect for him to talk directly about police reform. And he, in the past, on the campaign trail, the White House has reiterated this again. He would sign that George Floyd Justice and Policing Act into law. But of course, that faces a lot of headwinds in the Senate. It passed the House earlier this year. You would need those 10 Republican votes to sign on, and they're just not there. So Biden is still going to make his push for that bipartisan compromise, and that is very much what the White House is tracking right now. These three members, Senator Tim Scott, the Republican from South Carolina, Senator Cory Booker, and Karen Bass, all of them still discussing, still trying to hash out these compromises in hopes that they could potentially give a deliverable, not just to the White House, but one that would be bicameral and bipartisan.
Yeah, so I'm interested about that, Marianna. You've reported that Democrats and civil rights activists want to see legislation passed by the one-year mark of George Floyd's death, which is about a month from now. How realistic is that? And just break down for our audience, for example, if there is bipartisan agreement that something needs to be done, for example, Republicans as represented by Senator Scott and Democrats as represented by Cory Booker and Karen Bass, what are some of those things where they come in the middle and say yes? Because we kind of know where they feel about the things that they're not subscribing to, both sides of the aisle. But where is that common ground?
Sure. Well, parts of these legislation also address things like lynching. So federally banning that is something that across the board they very much agree with. There's also some discussions about making sure that the DOJ investigates. They potentially created a commission to investigate racial crimes in the past year and provide any kind of recommendations or results to change that. So that is where the agreements lie. But of course, May 25th is a very narrow deadline. That is less than a month away. The House is out this week. The Senate will be out next week. So they're going to come back in the middle of May. So it is going to be pretty difficult to actually get something done in those 2 weeks. But maybe by then we will at least have a proposal that senators and members of Congress can digest and, of course, ultimately debate.
So not only do we have, bipartisan interest and possibly common ground here, but there's a tremendous amount of public support. We just did a CBS News poll asking all kinds of questions in relation to Joe Biden and the Chauvin trial, and 60% of Americans approve of President Biden's handling of George Floyd's death and the Chauvin verdict. The polling also found that 48% of Americans agreed with the Black Lives Matter movement's ideas. I think it was 75% definitely the majority of Americans felt that the conviction in the Chauvin case was correct. I mean, there's a lot of energy supporting some sort of change, but we've also seen this before. We see it with gun control. If you do polling, you'll see that the vast majority of Americans would like to see, more restrictive laws. And whenever there's a mass shooting, then there's sort of a groundswell of emotions and conversation. And we can't seem to sort of do anything when it comes to gun control legislation. And so I'm wondering, this groundswell of public support for change, is it having an impact on lawmakers? Is it making them more likely to support some sort of reform?
They very much, it seems like as of right now, like you said, open to it. You're going to hear Biden say and point to these polls and essentially argue that this is the moment. We need to seize the moment. He's more or less said that already on police reform. Senator Lindsey Graham, for example, he was on some of the Sunday shows yesterday, and even he said that this is an area for compromise. We can find a solution on qualified immunity. And he is one of the stronger Republican voices. So it's interesting that Senator Tim Scott, it's not unsurprising that he is leading these talks, but many Republicans, including Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, has given him that deference, saying that he is the voice of the caucus that can convince the rest of his Republican members to potentially get on board with this legislation, whatever that they come up with. So that is going to be the key here, making sure that they can reach a compromise that brings in enough Republicans to pass the Senate, because if it does, the House is going to stick together and likely vote this through. As much as some Democrats are saying that there is some red lines, many are looking at this as this is either a moment where we can make incremental changes or we're not going to have any reform at all. So that is really what they are measuring right now. So it is possible, but as you said, Congress, they come to the table, they have bipartisan discussions, and then it ends up going nowhere. So it's something that we'll definitely be keeping an eye on in the weeks to come.
Marianna Sotomayor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.